Hi, folks. Welcome to episode 2 of Indie News Publishers Speak. I'm one of your 3 co-hosts, Jason Pramas of BINJ, and over here is...
I'm Joanna Detz. I'm the publisher at ecoRI News. Happy to join this session.
Cool. And down here?
I'm Brian Zayatz, the managing editor of the Shoestring out in Western Massachusetts.
Great. So this time we're going to jump right into stuff. No need for preamble. Every episode, every couple weeks, we're going to be looking at least one or possibly more kind of issues of moment to those of us that are kind of on the ground as independent news publishers, struggling to exist in an era when certainly from my perspective, folks can speak for themselves, but the journalism is in terminal collapse right now, especially at the local and regional levels, but also at the national level. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on over our heads, we feel, where people I term the good and the great, in our sector and beyond it are making a lot of decisions that affect us directly and not even consulting us in most cases. So we thought we should start talking about this stuff on a regular basis. Our groups will kind of kick it off, and we're probably going to have other publishers on as guests as time goes on. But so this time out, we thought we'd look at a new article. I actually have a hard copy. For the kids watching, this is paper, and there's printing on it. You see, this is how we used to get our information. So I thought I would just do this so I didn't have to keep glancing at different parts of the screen. Steve Waldman, who's a big name in our sector. He's the head of both Report for America and also Rebuild Local News. The first sort of organization provides reporters to those news publishers that can afford them. Report for America splits half the cost of usually young reporters that are sent out all over the U.S. To work at generally smaller news outlets, although not always. They take on half the cost, and then the publishers are supposed to take on half the cost. A lot of us cannot even afford to participate in that, but you can't say it's like a bad program or anything. It has placed a lot of reporters out there in the field in a time when their work is needed, so okay. And then Rebuild Local News is kind of, I think, basically lobbying in different states and federally to pass legislation and perhaps regulation that will ideally benefit news organizations, although from the perspective of smaller news outlets, we always question, what the legislation is, what the regulation is, and is it really going to benefit us, again, on the ground. So he's got an article out, AI data centers should help finance independent local journalism. And he posted this in a number of places, and he published it with a publication called Tech Policy Press. And when he posted it on LinkedIn, where I saw it, he also posted a conversation on an Atlantic podcast that we can get into a little bit later. I actually don't have the names of the people on the podcast right in front of me. Perhaps one of you all do. But they're kind of talking about issues that Steve Waldman obviously thinks are germane to what he's writing. His basic pitch in this article is that, all these data centers are being built by tech giants, some of them AI giants, some of them more now traditional tech giants. And these data centers are necessary, they say, massive increase in capacity to do all the stuff that the AI companies are doing to make it possible. They're being protested more and more and more on a number of grounds, which we will discuss. And Steve's kind of like, well, these things are happening. Some of the tech giants are giving some stuff out to communities that they're trying to build these centers in, ranging, I think you said, from like repairs to firehouses to potential breaks on electricity prices or whatever, and some small, even smaller stuff than that. So he's saying, why don't communities negotiate community benefit agreements that would get money from these tech giants to fund local news, so that at least the community is getting some news out of these data centers being built, and that's what we're going to address today. So, who wants to go first? Who has some opening thoughts on this whole discussion?
Brian, since you have seniority, I'll let you go first.
Seniority.
yeah. Brian was here first episode, so I guess that make him senior.
Well, I'm definitely eager to hear what you have to say, Joe, as the environmental specialist in the room right now. I can just start off by saying it just seems like there's just so many levels of irony operating here, because when we're talking about these big tech companies, we're talking about many of the same players, Google first and foremost, but also Meta, Facebook, that were so destructive to our industry in the first place in terms of using our content to get people hooked on their platforms, to get people interested in their search engines, and then pulling it out and making us pay to have the same access that helped them build their platform. So, Steve Waldman seems to have a lot of trust in these players that they're willing to, be, genuine and negotiate in good faith with the communities that they're coming to, which, is just not what we've seen in our particular industry. We get some pennies back that were taken from the industry in the form of the Google News Initiative. I don't know if Facebook has its own similar thing or not, but
not anymore.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just start there by saying that is an irony that stood out to me. But Joe, why don't you jump in? I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen whether these are good faith actors. And Waldman in his piece is suggesting that that these companies funnel money into a fellowship position to cover, essentially, a business position to cover AI. And I just see that as a total conflict of interest for, to extract money from a company in order to pay somebody to cover it. It just seems like there are all kinds of conflicts of interest there, for one thing. And like you said, Brian, these companies have been so destructive to our injury or Freudian slip, our industry. And, with AI, I just see AI it's scraping our content. It's making it so that even discovery of our websites, essentially our newsroom infrastructure, is now invisible when somebody searches for something on the internet. They get a nice little AI summary, which is so convenient, but they don't click to our websites, which we all pay, a lot of money to maintain and upgrade and cultivate. And so I just see it as like one more insult to our industry that we should be made to beg for scraps from these billion-dollar companies. And so much money is going into AI. And then I won't even get started on the environmental end of it, because that's I could
No, please do. We could go 40, 50 minutes, whatever. Joe, you could go right ahead.
Well, in Rhode Island, we haven't seen a data center built here yet, but in places like Michigan, data centers are springing up all over the place, and these centers use enormous amounts of energy and water, and oftentimes they're relying on a grid that's also services the community where they're sited. They're not, they don't have necessarily their own energy infrastructure, although some are starting to have that. And so it's an amazing drain on a community. It increases energy costs, and it's not clear to me that these centers, once built, create actual jobs. And even worse, sometimes they get these tax stabilization agreements. The community is so desperate to bring industry to a place that's been hollowed out by the the flight of automotive industry or other 20th century industries, that they're essentially paying these data centers to come in and create jobs. And so it's something that, and the Atlantic piece that Jason referenced, the podcast talks a little bit about this. It's really galvanized a populist movement that spans left and right in terms of the factions that are opposing these new data centers. So there are a lot of pieces at play, but from the journalism perspective, and what Steve Waldman is proposing, I see it as extremely problematic. That we would expect this industry to act in good faith and to fund our work, which it's essentially stealing.
Yeah.
That's the end of my rant.
Well, you're barely getting going, I'm sure. I will jump in. So it's Charlie Warzel and I think Jael Holzman are the people that were on the Atlantic podcast. Charlie does the podcast. Jael is a journalist who covers the AI industry, particularly kind of the ground, the grassroots response to stuff like data centers. And Charlie Warzel's whole, this is I think the show is called Galaxy Brain or something like that. And so Charlie also frequently talks about AI stuff. And they're not, neither of them are precisely AI boosters, but I find it interesting that that Steve Waldman happens to point to this particular conversation because the audience was enraged by it. If you look at the comments, there are some very, very, very sharp responses from people on the ground leading fights against data centers and basically saying, you both are trying to make us look like yokels. Like the one person in West Virginia, which has a whole, and Northern Virginia, which has a whole belt of these centers, apparently, all these kind of ruined communities, some of which have also become vacation communities. And one person writing from one of these is like an engineer, and he says, we have all these retired New York Times people and all these so journalists, and we have all these tech people, right, and other engineers. We know what we're talking about when we criticize these centers. This isn't just, not, everyone's not just, kind of walking in off the farm, not to insult farmers, because farmers know a lot of stuff a lot of us don't know. But, the idea of like some kind of, hick or something that doesn't know nothing from nothing and is just reacting because it's new and scary. No, they're reacting for very, very good reasons, right? And I think one of the biggest is this, and I think that this is a sin that both Waldman, who definitely should know better given his many elite connections, and Charlie and Jael are committing, which is just simply, I hate to say it, but it seems like they don't understand what a billionaire is and how much power billionaires are amassing, as some of them now approach trillionaire status. These are numbers that it's difficult for humans to comprehend, especially when we're talking about money and the power it buys. I mean, the idea that any kind of community benefits agreement, which, by the way, is usually the kind of thing that a social movement of the type that's gearing up now, right? Social movements that do have this tendency in human history to sweep away all that went before them if they really get going, right? But the idea is essentially, if you have that kind of movement and the movement sort of doesn't win, then okay, it's going to negotiate some stuff to try to get something, right? Some kind of remediation, some kind of reform. That's the point where you start to see community benefit agreements that are real in some ways, that would actually really offer some kind of control to the general public over the billionaires that are doing the stuff that they're doing with, what I usually call so-called AI, right? Because it really isn't artificial intelligence. It's kind of more advanced versions of technology we've already had that can do some interesting stuff and also do a lot of destructive stuff. And it wasn't like any of this stuff was really tested. Basically they just ripped off a bunch of creators like us, as Joe was mentioning, and, stole all our work to train their sort of models on, their large language models, which, that's the technology at the heart of all this stuff. The same kind of technology that was developed to run search engines like Google, and Google's one of the big players. They just are like pushing this stuff down everyone's throats, right? And they're doing it because what the rise of the AI industries represent, to me at least, is a massive taking by already insanely, obscenely rich people, obscenely powerful people, many of whom are now developing ideological stances that are fundamentally anti-democrats, small d. I'm talking about democracy here. Anti-human, all of it.
They're advocates of human extinction among their ilk.
Basically, yeah. They talk about turning people into, the favored anyway, into cyborgs or something like this. They say they're going to save humanity.
Consciousness into a chip and sending it into the galaxy.
Yeah.
Panspermia. Science fiction has already written about this, and now we're living it.
So they're already trying to leave us, and in the case of people like Musk, Elon Musk, the planet, right? Don't worry about that environmental stuff. We can destroy Earth. We're just going to go to other places and destroy them. Okay. So they're pushing all this stuff, but the way they're doing it involves them sucking up massive amounts of not just private money, which isn't really private. Basically all these fortunes we're talking about were stolen from the public in one way or another, right? Either through exploiting people's labor at all levels, right? For their own benefit or the benefit of the families that founded these fortunes. In some cases, even earlier than recently, although many of these fortunes are recent. And then, using the growing amounts of money available to buy government. And that's where we're at right now. We have an oligarchy, and to call it anything else is just betrays a complete misunderstanding of political science. And the oligarchy is just, bending government, bending what's left of the public sector at all levels to its whims. So, this idea that I feel like we're getting from Steve Waldman and from Charlie and Jael is sort of like it's 10 or 20 years ago when this process was not quite as far advanced as it is now, of these giant capitalist enterprises just doing whatever they want, pretty much. Right now, you can kind of affect someone as powerful as a billionaire if they rape somebody or murder somebody, but not always. You know what I mean? So those are about the only kinds of things that can have an effect right now on some of these folks. But mostly, no, nothing affects them. They do what they want. And now this idea that Steve and Charlie and Jael have that we're just gonna, we're gonna do the democratic process. People are upset, and Charlie and Jael pretty much insultingly dismiss. I know they don't mean to. It's clear they don't mean to do this, but they kind of insult folks at the grassroots, irrespective of politics. They're just, they talk about horseshoe theory, which is the idea that the extreme left and the extreme right are the same thing, which is a dangerous theory, right?
I thought it was a classic Atlantic thing going on here.
Oh, yeah.
It's like
both sidesism
creates the illusion of robust discourse while completely, poo-pooing anything that could possibly be coming from the left.
Yeah. And the idea that, well, why is the right involved? And they don't seem to think, well, gee, a lot of the current right is working class. And a lot of the current right went working class because the supposed left in American politics, the Democrats, have completely and repeatedly, betrayed them. So they go, where are they going to go? They go to a populist, nominally populist right. They've been lately finding out with the various wars that the Trump administration's got into after saying that wasn't going to happen, and a variety of other bad deals that the Trump administration's been involved in that weren't supposed to be happening, that maybe they bet on the wrong horse. And now they see some of Trump's biggest allies, right? Like right in there, causing these data centers to appear at the same time as people are very aware, because people like Sam Altman, until, one of these billionaires until recently was like, yeah, our technology is awesome. It's going to take all your jobs. None of you will have jobs because of it. Isn't that wonderful? And they're hearing this the way it really is meant, which is, yeah, they're taking our jobs for real. So for the left, for any decent left, which I hope we're all on, this is an opportunity, right? To say, hey, come back to the left and let's get a left together that actually takes this important stuff very seriously and moves on it, right? But that's not how people like Charlie and Yale and the Atlantic in general see things. They're like, who's disrupting our neoliberal wonderland? Why aren't we believing these great tech lords, when they tell us that everything's going to be wonderful? And again, I'm okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not entirely, right?
Well, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I mean, the biggest laugh that I got out of the assigned readings for today was this bit in the Atlantic conversation where, let me just make sure I'm attributing it correctly. It's Holzman who says something like, well, they just need to get better at storytelling. And it's like, no, they've told the story. They just don't believe that there's any level of democratic accountability that they're going to have to face. And so, I think, to me, it's that's who we're up against. I think you're correct, Jason, in diagnosing, this is more money than God that we're talking about. These, we're talking about people who are not used to any kind of accountability mechanisms. And so, to think that they're, maybe they will throw some pennies at the news industry, but I think we need to set our horizons somewhere else, because that is not going to cut it. If they, let's say what Waldman is suggesting happens, they can railroad right over that so easily, even if they fund 100 of these positions.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing that these folks are not getting, or pretending not to get, at least about billionaires, is that, they're buying up what's left of journalism right now. We just had the Paramount Skydance deal, which was really the Ellison family, Larry, the elder Oracle CEO guy, and his son, David, the head of a number of media companies and information companies. They're one of the 2 or 3 richest families on the planet that are legal. We don't count the Sinaloa cartel leaders and, different, kind of warlord characters and others around the world. But, of the ones we know about, they're among the richest. And after that giant mega media deal, right, that kind of concentrates power, in the hands of this one family, media power, the ability to affect what people know about the world. They're already working on a deal now to buy Warner Brothers Discover, which includes CNN and several other properties. I mean, and you know what? What else do you think the Ellison family have a huge stake in, right? In Musk's AI company, right? For example, they also have a massive deal through Oracle with OpenAI, right? $300 million, I think, data provision deal or something like that. But, they're completely part of the same interlocking set of billionaires and companies that are pushing this so-called AI boondoggle, which, another thing is that it may very well be about to collapse. This is a bubble.
I was wondering about that, because we're always fed this narrative of inevitability about AI, that it's coming faster than we thought. Get ready.
Ooh. It's the machine god.
Learn to use AI tools, AI proof your jobs. Do we really think, I'm curious, Brian and Jason, if you really think that is the trajectory we're on? And if so, what do we do?
Well, I think the trajectory is that the things that AI is most useful for is surveillance, is military technology. Like, that's, to me, like, that's the clientele that is going to sustain this industry. But I do think you're right that, you know, these valuations are just being floated on air because most people don't want AI, you know, and it, I think, has recently been shown to not actually, you know, for businesses that are adopting it, it's not actually providing any, you know, productivity gains that were promised. And so,
Right.
You know, what that ends up shaping up to look like on the market, I'm not the person to say, but you know, I think there are two things going on here, in my opinion.
I mean, we've all been through already other hype bubbles coming out of what we can call Silicon Valley still, right? You know, Web 2.0, Bitcoin, you know, like there's been just the NFT craze and whatever. I mean, this is probably the most serious bubble in tech stocks and tech investment since the original web bubble, you know, 98, 99 into 2000 when it crashed. Also the ISP bubble, you know, the internet service provider bubble in the mid 90s after the deregulation of the telecoms and so on. I mean, this is all, I know, you know, for anyone younger than us, this is probably like, what, you know, but, you know, we've kind of been here before, and, you know, what these folks need, they do have a ton of money. Like the Ellison family owns literally 98% of the island of Lanai, the 6th largest island in the Hawaiian chain, right? Themselves, they personally own this. They are as kings on this island. Yes, it's a lot of money, but even with that much money, they can't do it all themselves, much as probably individually many of them would like to do everything themselves, right, with their machines. And they definitely need to dip at the public well still, while there is one, you know. And they need investment. Okay, they need people to buy bonds and do other stuff, right, from all over the world, you know, and that you get those investments with hype. You get those investments by saying, at least a couple of years ago, the machine god is coming, you know, and you know, playing both sides off against the middle. On the one hand, saying this is the greatest thing ever, it's going to change everything, it's going to be so awesome, and on the other hand, saying, oh, it's doom, you know, the machine god will kill us all. And it's like, yeah, these are just hyped up chat bots, people. This is not, they don't, you know, unfortunately, they can be used, these systems, and are being used by companies like Palantir and others, the way Brian's talking about, surveillance and war, because that is indeed a very large funding stream that these companies depend on. Every single one of them is Pentagon deals. You may recall the spectacle of a number of tech leader nerds being made lieutenants colonel in various armed forces about a year and a half or so ago, right, as part of these deals. So they had the proper security clearance, right, to it, you know. So that's happening. What's also happening is a lot of the supposed money that they're claiming is being made has to do with the interlocking deals. That's why I use the word interlocking between these AI companies. They all and other related companies, really the dominant one, NVIDIA, that makes, you know, chips and stuff that are used in these data centers. And already they're not able to or needing to build as many data centers as they said, because regular people are not buying services from these companies. They're not into it. And young people already have been protesting quite loudly at a number of college commencements just in the last month, booing. Every time AI is mentioned, boo. So the people you'd logically expect to sort of get it, because they're supposedly, although I don't agree with this, digital natives, aren't into it. Our age group isn't into it. No age group is into it.
That's probably why they're not into it, because they're digital natives and they understand what they're looking at. I mean,
my 9-year-old niece is is the biggest anti-AI person I know. I don't know where she gets it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But it
I
may
mean,
collapse, right? Is what I'm getting at. It may collapse, right? This is there's a very strong possibility that these companies are are over leveraged. Their investors are putting in more and more money, and nothing is coming back. When the books are actually done, you have to look at critics like Ed Zitron in particular that talk a lot about this. The profits are not there, and so where do you think they're going to go when the bubble collapses? Should it collapse? I think it probably will. Right back to government.
Oh,
So
I
the
was
same
gonna say
public
they were
that,
gonna go into journalism.
yeah, it's all gonna all the money and the debt will come to us. Yes, of course. Why not? Anyway,
So what do we do, guys? Like,
right.
what is a small publisher to do? Because I'm beginning to feel like Google Zero, which is where search plummets and traffic to websites plummet as a result of those AI summaries, that is actually happening, bubble or not. Like, that is the thing that's actually we're seeing on the ground. And I'm beginning to think that our websites may go the way of like print newspapers. And then what? We're just kind of like forced to disseminate our content on these disparate platforms that are owned by tech overlords like Instagram, Substack. Like, where do we go? Back to print? What are you guys thinking?
How do we afford that? I have no problem going back to print. We did, we were doing fine in print when my crew had Dig Boston, the same principles that run BINJ. We had Dig Boston. And we went down because of the pandemic economy in 2023, but we were turning a profit January 2020 on print advertising. You know why? Because we got all the money from print advertising, which was a reasonable amount, whereas digital advertising, no, we don't get none of it. Google or whoever gets all of it, we get nothing. And they don't even give Google News Initiative, whatever, however many, tens or hundreds of millions they have and have run through, giving out these crumbs relative to their billions to our industry. It certainly doesn't go to us, except in tiny amounts. Like our publications might get a couple thousand here, and our operations all are under, about 500,000 and under. Mine's about 200,000, and Brian said about 150,000 last time we spoke, right? So we're very dinky, To those of you who think that's a lot of money every year, no, it isn't. And in the case of my organization, the money's not there for the rest of this year. We're still running out of money in August, right? And I mean, our big annual fundraiser isn't until November and December. So I don't know what we're supposed to do, although it would be real helpful for people like Steve Waldman that do have elite connections and therefore automatically more of an audience, however successful or not successful Mr. Waldman has been in certain projects. Whatever, Steve's got a platform. It'd be nice if he pushed back on this, so-called AI nonsense and called it out for what it is from the perspective of journalists, a massive boondoggle that's also accelerating the destruction of our industry. Other ideas?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have ideas. I do think, we're approaching dead internet, and, I just
explain that for folks that don't know what the dead internet theory is, Brian.
Dead internet is this idea. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to get it totally right, but this idea that the internet is increasingly just going to be, like if you are a person who goes onto the internet, what you're going to find is bots, you're going to find AI generated content, you're not going to be able to find other internet users or content produced by other internet users. It's just going to be one big product. So, I think we're heading in that direction. And I still get my weekly newspaper for the 5 small towns in this little corner of Western Mass where I live, and it's great. And but that is a tough operation to run. So, and I just asked in our annual reader survey if people would be interested in a Shoestring digest, and people mostly said no. So, I don't know what to do
Did
about
they say?
that.
Did they say why? Did anybody say why they're not interested?
No, we didn't ask why, but I'll have to.
Next survey.
Yeah, I'm gonna do some follow-up conversations. We're in the middle of it right now. If you're a Shoestring follower watching this, go take our survey. Thank you, Shoestring reader.
We polled readers on a print publication, and there was some opposition, mostly to do with actually cost. They didn't want us spending the money, and also environment. But we ended up doing a small print run anyway, and then people loved it. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things,
People are
because of
fickle.
course then you're gonna reach people who probably aren't filling out the survey, you know. So,
Exactly.
I think it's worth an experiment.
It is tough because we're all being trained by our magic boxes here, phones and whatnots, other digital devices, to just kind of get unused to reading print, right? Because it's like, why doesn't the link work? I don't, it doesn't work the same, right? And your brain works differently. But I think that studies by psychologists, social psychologists in particular, and others kind of indicate that a lot of damage is being done, to people's thought processes and emotions and other stuff by constant stimulation.
And our focus. You'll start to see a lot of newsrooms now have those like 3 bullets at the top of the story.
That's
which
right.
is usually an AI generated summary meant to entice those AI bots that create the Google summaries to scrape that content. But you don't even have to read the whole story anymore. You just read the summary. And so, I think we're just losing the ability to think, to think actually, and to read in a way that's, responsive and focused. So I'm worried how this whole society is rewiring our brains, how the digital age is rewiring our brains. I mean, there's some things that have been really great. Like our newsrooms could never have started a newspaper, back in the 80s. Like the barrier to entry was so high for publishers, and now literally anybody can publish, good or bad. You just have to have an internet connection or a cell phone, and you can publish.
However, anybody can also use the available AI, services. And this is particularly, there's been studies done on YouTube. Now, to get to Brian's dead internet theory mention, at least 20% of all content on YouTube is AI slop. So people can also take the content we all work so hard to produce, and they can suck it up. They can, have bots rewrite it and repurpose it. They can have bots even create videos where there were no videos before, and just put it out there under their own names and covers. Distorted though, right? So it's not really saying what we said as journalists. It's saying like whatever, and they're sending this out constantly simply to monetize it or attempt to on platforms like YouTube, who for their part claim to be cracking down on it, but a lot of us do not believe that at all, because a lot of money's being made. So it's now we're facing this other problem too, like that people can just duplicate our content and mess with it like really, really easily. So that would include, like, just to take our examples locally and regionally, like, let's say, Joe covers something happening in the Narragansett Bay and, is sort of valorizing in essence, and like, protest movements against some pollution. Let's say it's some kind of really gross power plant or whatever it is that hasn't been previously remediated. And, it's perfectly easy for people that are like, burn, baby, burn, more dirty power. Who cares about the bay? It'll clean itself up. It's like a giant toilet, you can flush it, whatever. And they can put out their own positions, kind of using stuff that we put out against us. Just simply, more likely, just simply use money and power to just buy more eyeballs, more access to more eyeballs than we ever can. Because as we've been saying, we're losing those eyeballs. Like certainly everything that used to come to us from search engines. no longer is.
Or even social
Um,
media, for that
yeah.
matter.
Oh, forget social media. I mean,
They were supposed to be our friend. They gave us money back
oh
in
yeah.
a decade ago. Facebook was pouring money into journalism with its journalism project, and
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to that thing.
Yeah, I know. They just pulled out of it as
Yeah.
part of the general turn to the right on the part of the billionaires that own these companies, because it's convenient to them to be hard right, because in that universe, they get to be, the kind of feudal lords, techno-feudal, as the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis so often says, techno-feudalist lords, right? The new lords, the new feudalists. They can have unlimited private power, right? And it's, very difficult thing to fight back against, as we've been saying. So it seems like we need to pay close attention to these grassroots movements on the ground and try to cover them fairly, and also try to encourage them to check us out. That one thing that they should know they're going to be losing with the rise of these AI companies, if again the tech bubble and the AI bubble doesn't collapse and take out our economy with it, which is an even worse outcome in many ways, but might be better in the long run from the perspective of this negative technology. They might understand that one thing they're going to lose is any ability to get any kind of independent take on anything that matters to them. Like something that's not, even that Atlantic thing, like how many ads were in that thing for kind of gross stuff?
I don't know. I have an ad blocker.
There you go. It's always problematic. We should also say, when we're talking about the news industry, from our perspective, coming from the political left and having been therefore iced out of larger media for our careers, and I think in all our cases, probably, certainly mine, and I'm 59 now, right? And I've been a journalist for 40 years. I'm kind of not allowed to appear very much in mainstream commercial media because, like I hope a good journalist, I have the uncomfortable tendency to criticize great concentrations of wealth and power and criticize corporate power and stuff like that. And that's what funds commercial media. So already we're talking about a journalism that in large part was corrupted by money and power, and always has been
co-opted.
Yeah. And that includes what's called public media, which, maybe in the 1960s when it was just getting going, public media was pretty good and basically like happening in the public interest. But as Congress has been pushed to cut public media, and as public media has become more and more independent nonprofits that rely on rich people to give them money to keep their stations running and stuff like that, especially now, those folks don't want certain kinds of content. They don't,
And we're in the same boat because we're largely beholden to deep-pocketed people too, because we run nonprofits. But
are we, Brian? Because we keep hearing from Press Forward and probably Steve Waldman and others that no, it's we're going to just get all these people in People Land to give all this money, and it's not just the rich.
Right. What was I thinking?
Well, tell me, is that what you all experienced? Do you experience the pennies of working people, like the old so-called yellow press or the quote-unquote working man's press of like the 1820s and 30s in the U.S.? Like, is it pennies from working people that are primarily providing our relatively tiny budgets? Because not ours. BINJ is not. That's not BINJ.
Well, no, we're maybe a third funded by what you could call pennies from working people. But,
Same.
We're pretty small. I think, the point I'm making here is like, if you look at who the biggest players in nonprofit journalism are and where they're getting their money, it's not pennies from working people,
No.
But I do think, to your point, Jason, like if there's any opportunity here, we have the ability to point out to people that we're, real information checked by real people, and that we're gonna keep doing it until we can't do it anymore. So I don't know. I think there's a real opportunity to like go on the ground and actually hear out the people who are opposed to these projects, because we can see that they're not getting a fair shake in traditional media. Is what it looks like to me.
What's left of it.
Yeah, but we're in New England, and I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of these projects anyway.
I don't know. There was
Why?
one proposed for Rhode Island.
Why? Are you asking
why?
me?
I mean, what happened to the one in Rhode Island, Joe?
There was a huge public outcry in the town of
Ah.
Smithfield, and it's essentially the town created a zoning moratorium on data centers. But I think that's the thing is, like, you can't on a town by town basis fight these data centers. I don't know how other states are handling it. I think there's some legislation at the state house around data centers and like zoning regulations, but I do think, I don't know why, but I do agree with Brian. I think the Midwest is more ripe for data centers. I think it's bigger, less densely populated.
Well, the Shoestring did some reporting on this, and that is sort of where my opinion on this is coming from. It's just that I don't think that the combination of ingredients that make a good site for a data center actually exist in very many places in New England. Because there's not a lot of cheap power. There's not a lot of like connectivity to major, pieces of the power grid, and there's not a lot of like open space that is near those things. So I think that's where you see the parts of the country that are getting hit pretty hard by these things. I think that it's because they have all of those things like right in their backyards. But I would recommend, people to go check out the Shoestrings reporting on this from December 30th, I think. We broke a story about there's a data center proposed for Westfield, Massachusetts that our reporter found was seemingly abandoned by its developers, and nobody knew this yet. And, largely I think it's just because it doesn't make sense to have hyperscale data centers in New England. But I could be wrong.
Well, we've gotten rid of most of our nukes in New England. We do retain certain democratic traditions, to a degree, more than maybe some other parts of the country. It's kind of hard to do, a like-to-like comparison. Very different places, states, traditions. And we have rivers, but we don't have like the biggest, rivers for hydro, right? We don't have a lot of big dams. So I guess those are some of the things. And we don't have a lot of open land that's just available. Did we lose Brian, or do we still have Brian?
We lost him. We have his name only.
Yeah, I see like an image or whatever. Hopefully he tries to get back in. Probably this is a sign that we should wrap up, although it's not necessarily the way that we were going to wrap up. And I don't know what happened to Brian's connection or whatever, but I do know that internet connections are not that terrific out in Western Mass sometimes. So
only they had AI.
Yeah. So no, we obviously, Joanna, do not have the ultimate solutions here, but we do think, right, that there should be more open conversation that involves a hell of a lot more news publishers, among, even in our sector, in the nonprofit news sector. It would be really nice to have like open conversations between the favored elite within our sector that, we talked about today a little bit, and that Brian and I talked about in the first episode. I guess we don't need to name names right this second, but I'm sure you all know who you are. People that are getting millions of dollars, mostly from big foundations, that are largely unwilling to fund the probably at least 1,000 significant smaller publications around the U.S. That are trying desperately to stop their communities from becoming news deserts, as we are. So, those folks tend to have conversations over our heads, and we would like them to cut that out, because, and they certainly shouldn't speak for us when talking about ideas like community benefit agreements with, these monstrous so-called AI, corporations.
I agree. They should come on this show.
Yes, that could happen. I mean, although they'd probably be like, please don't drop off the show in the middle of the show, or whatever. And we'll be like, yeah, give us more money for even better tech. And we will do that.
Clearly.
Okay, well, thanks, Joanna Detz of ecoRI News. And thanks to Brian Zayatz of the Shoestring, wherever he may be at the moment. And we'll be back in a couple weeks, kind of chatting about some other horrible thing going on in our corner of the news industry or in the news industry in general. So bye, folks, and we will now end the show. Let's